Sure. Thank you everybody for being here tonight. I am Eva Pauling. I am a board member of Fuel, which is Families Unified for Education in Laguna. We're only a few months old. We started really with the intent to get parents' voices heard and to really help educate the community and ourselves on all things school board, school district, how we operate, what makes this school district so incredible. I think a lot of us have chosen to live here because we just blanketly know that the schools are good. And we believe that our kind of job as a group of parents is to better inform all of us as to what makes them so great. So for tonight, we have Jeff Dixon here, our acting superintendent, and President Dee Perry of our school board. And Jeff is going to be walking us through Finance 101, and Dee will help kind of assist where it makes sense. But again, Jeff will be handling the majority of it, and Dee will interject as needed. So thank you guys both for joining tonight.
Well, thank you. And I will say, I will speak on behalf of the board. We really appreciate the opportunity to educate our families and community. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I know President Perry has been on the board long enough to see a lot of my budget presentations, but what I can say is um, school finance is complicated, and it behooves us, the more people who understand it, even if it's at a high level, is important. And we really appreciate the engagement. We appreciate people being interested in it because good financial management starts with very strong checks and balances, and having a community that understands what they're looking at is one of those checks and balances I think we take pride in. So thank you again for allowing us to present. As it was mentioned earlier, this is the community's money. This is not any individual's money. And so I would argue I treat our district's budget as more important than my own household budget because it's not my money, and there's a lot of accountability that goes along with that. So you have a business team that feels it, the entire business team feels the exact same way. So we really take pride in good stewardship and appreciate the opportunity for serving this district. And as I mentioned, I have the benefit of having kids in the district, so I know how important it is. So
Jeff, real quick, can you speak to how big your team is and kind of what that's made up of, just briefly?
sure. So we have one payroll specialist. We have one accounting specialist who really acts as an accounts payable person. We have one facilities assistant, one financial analyst, and one budget analyst, budget administrator, I should say. And then I have an assistant who does mostly a lot of the transportation, the bus pass sales. So we're very small, but we're very
You say
mighty.
pretty nimble team.
Yeah, but it's also, again, going back to why I think having good checks and balances are important. When you don't have a lot of layers, you got to take advantage of every layer you have. So, and they're incredible. The business team, I'll tell you, um, I'll just, without going into detail, I was not able to work for a couple months due to a health issue, and everything went seamlessly because they are that good. Um, and so I appreciate them on a daily basis. And if any of them are on, I don't see it, thank you because they're the best team in the state of California by far.
That's
I want
awesome.
to interject also that Jeff has been amazing about making it more understandable for us. When I was first on the board, we had a wonderful financial manager, but he didn't have any charts or graphs. And when I asked for that, then I said, just a pie chart, something, because it helps us that aren't as financially savvy really understand. So I really appreciate that Jeff really makes it understandable for all of us. And thank you, Jeff.
Appreciate
Yeah,
that.
it's hard to just look at spreadsheets, right?
Right.
No, it's not. I
Well,
love spreadsheets. I, I know I appreciate it. And that goes back to us wanting to always make it more understandable. The more people understand, the better for all of us.
right.
That's great. All right, let's get started.
So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And so tonight we're going to talk, this is very high level presentation. And just to start off for the entire group to know, we are talking solely about the general fund of the district. So this, if you look at numbers, it's Fund 01. There are other funds that are managed by the district. And I know a lot of questions have come up about the pool and funding for the pool. That is a totally separate fund. That's in our Fund 40s. So tonight, I can address questions on that, but we're really looking at our general operating fund, which is the biggest fund, most important fund. All the revenues and expenditures of this fund go to support the educational activities of our district. And so that's what we're going to focus in on. This is an hour-long presentation. It's going to take a lot more to really garner understanding and expertise on district budgeting and funding and financing, which we're hoping to do. And we're always going to be open to doing as a district because, like I said, it's important that we all understand this. And I'm going to use common language that hopefully you've heard me do in previous budget presentations, but none of this is new information. So I just want to make sure I put this in a little different format that's hopefully a little more user-friendly. And as mentioned, if you have questions along the way and we can't get to them tonight, please never hesitate to send them on. We'll always answer your questions. They're actually very much appreciated. So what we're going to talk about tonight is what is the overall budget? And there's some key milestones that we have to consider. What kind of calendar is our budget on? And then what are the total revenue and expenditure data points that are important for our district? And then how do we develop our budget? I think it's a really important understanding how a budget is developed, and it differs from school sites to departments, and I'll get into that later. How do you, as a community, look and see where we're at financially? There's a lot of different reports that we do. Some are required, some are just board directed that we do as a district. And so I'm going to share that information. And then we've also talked about financing options, and this is more specific to facilities improvements. And this has come up over the past couple months, but it's actually been talked about over the past couple of years. And, it's come in terms of like, what is a general obligation bond versus what is a certificate of participation? So I'm going to share information at the end on that. And I think it's important that we just get a general understanding as a community what those mean. But first, let's start with what is community funded, or is more of a typical term, basic aid school district. So every school district in the state of California receives property tax revenue, every one of them. But what it is with local control funding formula and Proposition 98, those establish what are called minimum guarantees for funding of schools and education. And that minimum guarantee is based on how many kids you have in the school. Now it's referred to as ADA, or average daily attendance, but just simplify it. How many kids do you have in the school? And based on those kids, you're given a minimum grant guarantee to fund your school or your district. So a normal district that's not community funded receives property taxes. And you can see on this slide, the left image there shows property taxes that doesn't meet or fill up to the minimum guarantee that's provided for that school district. What happens in that case? And these are typical LCFF districts. So when you hear us say that term, an LCFF district, that means they're getting state money to bring them up to their minimum guarantee. What happens with a basic aid or community funded district is our property tax revenue exceeds that minimum guarantee. So we have what's called excess property tax or excess revenue. And currently we keep all of that revenue. So even though we're going beyond the minimum guarantee, which the average district in California, let's say, is about $19,000 per student, we are, based on our property tax revenue, receiving almost $35,000 per student. So we're not having to give that money back to the state. It stays with the district. And so that's why we are community funded. And there's only a little over 100 community funded districts in the state of California. So
Jeff, to put that into context, 100 of like how many? Just out of curiosity.
Over 1,000.
Okay.
Yeah, so a little under 10%. And the issue has come up, and it came back up in the one of the Great Recession back in 08, 09, and before that, is sometimes you hear rumblings at the state level of them wanting to eliminate that excess property tax revenue. And so it would make us a LCFF district versus being a community funded district. arguments come out. I know Laguna Beach alone came out hard against any sort of proposal that does that. And the reason for that, and it's very logical, is because if the state of California were to say, okay, we're getting rid of community funded districts, we're taking back all of that excess revenue and we're going to redistribute it amongst all the other districts, you're talking a couple dollars per student of benefit for all other districts in California, and you're devastating almost 10% of the districts in California. So that's the argument that we're always going to stand next to. This usually only comes up when there's very deep recessions that the state is facing and they're looking for areas to grab money from. But for us, it's something of a concern we always have in the back of our mind. And that is also why every organization that we talk to and we're a part of recommends that a community funded district has very strong financial reserves. And we do. And that's very important because you never know, one little legislative switch can cause a very big financial turmoil for our district, specifically because we're represented so small, even though we're deemed resource rich. Taking from us doesn't necessarily benefit any of the other districts. And they all know that too. So they usually lobby on our behalf, just as we lobby on behalf of the LCFF districts, trying to get them more money per student. And we advocate for that because one of the things I think we have a responsibility as a community funded district is saying, if we get so much more money per student than the minimum guarantee, how are we outperforming and doing better than those LCFF districts? And we need to be a model for that because we can show the state of California and the rest of the communities, look, if you invest in education, look at how many great things you can do and the success of your students. And that's really important. I think that's one of the big things that I like to model is if we have these resources, how are we proving that we're investing them in the right way and making our students the most successful they can be?
Can you also comment
That's
on
a great point.
we were able to add to our reserves, how they changed that?
Oh, yeah. So there was a law a few years ago that said that districts cannot exceed 10% of their total operating budget as far as maintaining reserves. Now, we lobbied as community funded districts, knowing that we need to have larger reserves to say, no, that can't apply to us. And we were successful. So the law was amended to say school districts cannot maintain more than 10% of their operating budget in reserves unless they are community funded or a small school district. In Laguna Beach, our board policy also stipulates that we have an additional 2% in our reserve for economic uncertainties. So we have 5% in our general fund ending fund balance for a reserve for economic uncertainties. And you'll see that when you look at the components of the ending fund balance in any of our budget reports. And all it is money we can't spend. It's held in our fund balance. And that's just a reserve.
And
So it's just a forced savings account, essentially, right?
Yep, in the general fund, we have, like I said, that Fund 17 that's outside of general fund. That's a much larger savings account. And we also have the Fund 40s that offers a saving, it serves as a savings account. But in our general fund, we have a 5% minimum that we must hold.
And years ago, the district was not in good financial shape, and teachers, everyone had to take a cut in their salary, which was horrible. And since then, I want to do a shout out to board members since that time being really careful about making sure we had a balance there and could protect salaries and programs if things got bad.
Dee, how long ago was that? Just out of curiosity.
I am
Like not exact, but like 10
Um,
years ago, 15, 20.
no, it was probably 25 years ago.
Late
It was
90s.
it was quite a while ago.
Yeah.
But it was pretty devastating, and we
Yeah, that would
didn't
be
want
awful
that to happen again. And everybody who came on the board was very careful about making sure we were financially stable.
Yeah. And I don't want to go too off topic, but that is why the Joint Fiscal Management Committee was started, was based on those troubling financial times. Was to explain how did the finances go so south and how are we going to restore these cuts. So that did happen in the late 90s, and that's one of the premises for why the JFMC, or the Joint Fiscal Management Committee, was started.
Right.
It's great.
Thanks.
Okay.
So when we talk about our budget, we are on a fiscal year. So our budget begins July 1, it ends June 30th. Throughout the year, we have two required reports that are adjustments to the budget. The first is our first interim. At the same time, and that's due by the mid-December every year. At the same time, our annual financial audit is also due. So that's when we're wrapping up with our auditors, and we usually present that audit report to the board in December or January. The second interim budget report is due by the middle of March, and that's really when we kick off our budget development for the next year. And I'm going to get into more details on these in the next few slides, but those are the two big adjustments we make to the budget each year. The reason I put the property tax revenue receipts up there, so you have in December of the current year or in April, those are our two largest property tax revenue receipts of the year. We receive around 8 property tax revenue receipts per year, but the two big ones happen in December or early January and April. So those are the ones that are really important to us. Those align with our forecast. We can see what is the growth or decline based on last year of receipt at the exact same time. Because as you know, property tax is based on assessed valuation. So when you get that first property tax revenue receipt, you can see how well it aligns with your projection. And that's why I think it's really important to track that. So if you're talking to the business office and saying, how are we looking in terms of revenue? That question really becomes way more accurate after December.
And then is after December the time that you would start looking at next year's budget, like when you start working on 26, 27, let's say, to start building what that budget would look like?
Yep. Yep. And I'm going to talk about that in the next few slides, but that's why right after, usually in February each year, we get our updated property tax forecast from our consultant. Thankfully, our board has allowed us to hire a consultant to help us with our property tax forecast every year. And that's really important because that is our primary source of revenue. And so making a forecast, I mean, even a 0.5% is worth almost $300,000 for us. So it's a big deal to be accurate with that.
Yeah.
So when we get into the fiscal year start, prior to July 1, each year the budget has to be approved. So the way we've been doing that in the past couple of years is at the last meeting in May, we have an information item on the budget. And then the first meeting in June, we go for approval of the budget. At the same time, our business team is really thick and it's called closing the books. So closing the books, all that means is we have purchase orders. That's how we pay our vendors. And a purchase order is something like an IOU. You can think of it as an IOU. It's created when we get a proposal from a vendor. It's approved. We input it into our Business Plus system. And what that does is it says, okay, vendor, we're going to send you this contract that says we're going to pay you $10,000 between now and the end of the fiscal year. That vendor will bill against that purchase order. We make payments based on their invoices. All of the payments come from the county office. So none of this money is coming from we don't control our money. It's all at the county treasury. It comes from the county office. At the end of the year, if that vendor has only billed us for 6 of the $10,000 of the payments, we'll reach out to them and say, hey, are your services done? There's nothing left to be rendered. They say yes. We can close that purchase order. And what that does is it creates $4,000 freeing up for our budget, and that turns into what we call carryover. So it's a big process. We deal with a lot of purchase orders, a lot of vendors. It's a very busy time. It's a summer rush for us in the business office. And then at first interim, that's when we actually account for that carryover. So first interim is it's due before the middle of December every single year. It's takes into account all financial information, both revenues and expenditures that we have through the end of October. So at first interim, like I said, we account for the carryover we saw from closing the books, and that's our estimated actuals for the previous year. We have our first large installment of property tax that hasn't yet come. So we're still operating on that property tax forecast or assumption. So we don't have a good indicator, although we're usually pretty close. But at the end of the day, it's still an unknown. We do have our expenditure data through end of October, and we're able to compare that to the previous year and gives us a trend analysis so we can help forecast through the end of the year. And then at the same time, we have our prior year audit wrapping up, and we're going to present that to the board by the middle of December or January, as I mentioned. So it's a good time. It is still much more reliant on forecasted data than it is any actual data, other than the expenditures that we have through October, which, as you know, is still kind of what I would consider the beginning of the school year. And so it becomes a little more difficult. Second interim, however, we have to present this by the middle of March each year, and it takes into account all of the financial data through the end of January. So now we do have that first big property tax revenue receipt that we receive in December. And so we're able to really start tightening in on what our revenues are going to be compared to the prior year. The expenditure data gives us a little longer runway on what we have through the end of January. And it's still just comparing to the previous year. But what's important is because we have that key piece of revenue data, that big December revenue property tax payment, we're able to use the second interim data to start our negotiations. So as you know, now we're in negotiation season. We use our second interim numbers as a basis for those negotiations. So when you see me present it, which happened on December 16th this year, second interim report, you can look at that report and get a real good indicator of, okay, where is the district financially and what sort of numbers valuation are they going to have going into negotiations when you talk about compensation or additional programs or expenditures. All that could be based on that second interim number. After second interim, we get into our fiscal year end, and we're in that process right now. Mid-April every year, we start closing down the purchase order process. And what that means is school sites and departments can no longer put purchase orders in the system. Their existing purchase orders are still there, and we still make payments based on those purchase orders. But what it helps us do is by not creating new purchase orders, that's just one more thing for us to have to close by the end of the year. As an indicator, there's well over 1,200, 1,300 purchase orders that we have to go through and close every single year. And it's not just vendors, right? There's utility bills. So we have our Edison bill, we have SoCal Gas, Laguna Beach County Water District. All of those, we have to wait until the final bill so we can close those. But it is a process. And we begin our annual audit. So last week, our auditors were here looking at it's our mid-year audit. And so as we close the books and we get into the summer, they'll come back for our annual audit. And what that does is it not just looking at our financials, they sample all of our expenditures of what we've paid. They sample our process. They're always looking into additional checks and balance issues that's personal requests I make to them every single year. And they even look at such things as attendance and how are we accounting for attendance? Are we complying with the nutrition program requirements? Do we have a transportation plan in place that meets all of the legal requirements for reimbursement? So they are looking at a full gamut. So when I say our audits don't just involve the business office, they don't. They involve every single school site and department. They even look at ASBs. So it's a really
Wow.
comprehensive process. And when you as a
So
community,
that's in place to make sure essentially that like there is nothing that could get pushed through without every single like proper check and balance in place, right, throughout the year.
yes, yes, we pay the auditors for this service, so I really treat it as it's a service, and I want to find anything I can find. If there's an area to improve, we absolutely need to improve it. Let's take advantage of this.
Awesome.
To that regard, when you hear an audit report, the biggest commendation you can get from auditors is it's unmodified. And that's why that's on this slide. Now, that's not to say that there's no comments Oftentimes you'll find comments in an audit report. A good example would be with ASB funds. Sometimes ASB will collect money for a fundraiser, let's say, hold the money in the ASB office for more than one day, and then send it to the business office for processing. Because they didn't send it same day, that would be a comment from the auditor saying, please make sure your ASBs send the money to the business office on the same day. That's a
So
different,
it's saying that your reporting is 100% accurate. Some of the processes that maybe happened could change a little based on whatever happened.
correct. If you weren't reporting 100% accurate, it would be called a finding. And a finding isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be, right? If you've been have a lot of if there's a lot of misreporting or inaccurate ledger postings, that would be a finding. And depending on what it is, that could be a big issue. But regardless, when I hear the word finding, it's something you really want to pay attention to and make sure that the business office or whatever it's related to is not only able to respond to that finding, but has a process going forward to never let that finding happen again.
I'm guessing we're usually unmodified just based on your love of the term.
We've been unmodified every audit, yeah, but it's nothing you want to take for granted, that's for sure.
It's
So,
great.
so now let's move into our budget and we'll start first with our revenues. And here are the big three when we talk about our revenues. You have our property taxes, state and local revenue, and federal. Those are in order of magnitude. So property taxes makes up about 84% of our total revenues. When you look at the big budget report and you go back into the detailed printout at the back of the report and it shows all the specific line items, what you'll note is that there's different types of taxes that come in as revenues, secured, unsecured, and then prior year. Just know that secured is by far the largest portion of that. Unsecured roll taxes mainly has to do with anticipated or like home improvements that haven't been reassessed fully or in the process of being reassessed. In prior years, just clean up from prior year. But secured roll taxes is the most important. That's the largest portion. But just so you know that you're going to see different types of taxes. Specific restricted programs. That means you're getting money opportunities program, the ELOP, it must be spent for ELOP. It could be things like state aid for the, it could be something like nutrition. It has to be for Fund 13, which is our nutrition services program funding. But it's funding that comes that you do not have a choice on how you want to spend it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of plans that we have to submit for those categorical funds to the state that every time the state gets new money, they like to usually add categorical funding, which just for everyone to know, for a community funded district is not a bad thing because when it's a categorical or restricted funding, we tend to get it. Whereas if it were to be built into LCFF or Prop 98 general allocation for students, we do not get it. A good example of that is transitional kindergarten. We don't get a single dollar from the state on transitional kindergarten. Other districts that are not community funded do.
So for those restricted funds, do we have to like apply to get them or do we just automatically get them?
Automatically get them.
Okay.
Yep. And then of course our local is donations and grants received throughout the year. And this area, this section, you'll see fluctuate the most throughout the budget cycle. So when we go back to budget adoption, to first interim and second interim, our local revenue, you'll see fluctuate the most, usually increases because we do not budget grants until we receive them or unless we have something in writing saying the exact amount we're going to receive. So a good example is school power and PTAs. We don't budget the money they give us until we get it.
Got it.
Last is federal, special education and categoricals. So special education makes up a big chunk of the federal revenue. Now, I know there were some questions on this, so I'll talk a little bit about it. So Federal wise, we receive a little over $900,000 total as a school district.
Do you want to go to the next slide, actually, Jeff? Because I think it shows everything nicely. So yeah,
There you
there,
go.
perfect.
So there's the amounts that you have. So property taxes, you can see clearly the largest revenue source we have. State and local, significant, and federal, not as significant, but still impactful, right? So our special education received about $470,000. Even with the changes happening at the federal government right now, all of our advice and recommendations thus far are that we're still going to receive that allocation, regardless of the executive orders. The only amount of our federal funding that has been put at risk and is likely, and we're not going to budget for, is associated with Title II. And that has to do with professional development grants for teachers. In Title II, we receive about $50,000 per year. So that is not a significant budget impact and is nothing I think our community needs to worry about with any sort of changes at the federal government right now. I mean, quite frankly, even if all of the federal funding our district receives goes away, we would be able to manage that less than $1 million. We would figure out a way to make it work. But at this point, only of the 900,000, only about 50,000 is really at risk, and that will not be budgeted for in the 25-26 budget proposed to the
So
board.
Jeff, if worst case scenario, that 920,000 entirely gets wiped out, would that have any impact on how we treat special ed and how we fund the programs here?
No, it cannot. So we don't have a choice with special education. When a student comes to us and they have needs for their educational program via their individualized education plan, the IEP, we as a district, we don't even discuss this with the school board. They don't have a say in whether or not we can provide the services or not provide services for a student. We must, whatever's in that IEP must be provided. And that is another reason why I think having budget flexibility is so important, because you can get students who move into the district who may need very unique and customized and intensive specialized services that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we just have to budget for it. And so one of the areas that I know President Perry and we've actually looked at and talked about quite a bit is in our ending fund balance, the components of ending fund balance. There is a section in there called assigned, and it's assigned potential one time. And it calls it out as board goals and priorities. Well, that is used as a flexible piece to either adapt to any sort of increase in special ed cost. It could be a emergency expenditure like we experienced maybe 7 years ago when we had the gas leak at Thurston Middle School. It's just a matter of our general fund where we will be able to allocate money right away, and we usually keep about $2 million in that so that we don't have to dip into any of our reserves. And it gives us the flexibility to really react and prepare well. And so that's why, going back to your question on special education, that's one of the areas we would pull from if the state were to say, or the Fed would say, no, we're not, no more money for special education. We have enough money in our general fund potential one time to absorb that and be able to not take away or not provide any services for our students, which would be illegal anyway.
And I assume that this 468 that we get is only a fraction of what we spend on special education anyway, that the rest of that does just come from the other $87 million here.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
What percentage of our budget does go for special education, Jeff?
about $13 million.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And then there was a question just came up on is there any exposure for us with federal cuts to our nutrition plans and how we pay for that?
So yeah, they do provide in the categorical section some money for our nutrition program. It's a pennies on the dollar compared to what we get from the state of California.
Okay.
It would be minimal. And I think our goal with nutrition, and we have a new supervisor of nutrition, our goal with nutrition is less about trying to make money in the program and more about providing local, organic, fresh sourced meals that our kids actually enjoy. And she's been really good on that. She's only in week 4. So she's still brand new, but she's very hot and heavy on that. And so it gets me excited because I know I for 10 years I've heard about nutrition and the only win I have is popcorn chicken.
Oh
So
yeah. Same in this house too. That's the only one my kids will eat, unfortunately. But yeah,
yeah.
that's great news.
Yeah. So yeah, it's very minimal and it would be something that wouldn't deter or impact our program at all.
Okay, great. So I know we only have like 20 minutes left technically, so we are probably going to have to breeze through some of this. So
No
you
problem.
keep moving. I will probably just jump in and, ask some more questions that are just coming through.
I will go faster. Anyone watched the board meeting, I did the same presentation in 7 minutes, so I
Yeah.
can go faster, no problem. Okay, so you see our total revenues is almost $90 million. And this is growing every single year. And even though we're declining in enrollment, we manage these resources are important. Every dollar is a piece of management in the business office. So it's something we take seriously. So just because we're declining in enrollment doesn't mean that our jobs get any easier in managing our resources because there's always more. Expenditures, again, in order, we have staffing is the largest cost for our school district, salaries and benefits. We're a people organization. Services, the next highest. Because we're smaller, we do outsource a lot of our services. The big one being transportation, of course. We have special education for our non-public schools. We have utilities, legal services, and then our non-employee vendors. A great example of that is like our landscaping and maintenance. And then supplies. When you look at our budget, there's two big categories of supplies you can focus in on. You have instructional supplies and non-instructional supplies. So instructional supplies simply means that it's specific purchases made for supplies used in the classroom to educate the students. Non-instructional supplies would be things to support like office functions. So it could be copier paper, toner, could be refreshments, um, things of that nature. Here's the numbers when you look at our expenditures. So a little over $88 million total in expenditures, and this is again based on second interim. You can see the cost of salaries and benefits totals the most. It's about 74% of our total expenditure budget. Contracted services, books and supplies, and capital outlay. The only thing I'll say on this, when you hear capital outlay, that is like facilities improvements. Again, this is just general fund. So that is all actually routine restricted maintenance. So that is our maintenance program in the general fund. That has nothing to do with any sort of the pool or the stadium improvement at the high school or Thurston's Field. That is specific to our maintenance program.
So, Jeff, because we do have a lot of questions on the pool, and I know we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details, but just can you speak to where pool funding would come from or is intended to come from as it sits today?
Yep. So the pool funding will come 100% from the capital improvement program. That's in Fund 40. And that is completely self-funded by the district. There's annual contributions from the general fund to Fund 40. Basically what it's done is built up over time, and we still have $10 million plus sitting in our general fund balance that could be made for the transfer to pay for the pool project. We're honestly just waiting for the pool project to be bid so we know the exact cost before we recommend a transfer from the general fund to support the project. And that will require board action and a resolution of approval before we do that.
But assuming that the pool is relatively in the range that it's been talked about from a cost perspective, it will not cost any additional other than what we currently have in our funds. There's no COP needed for it. There's no additional debt that's being taken on for it, correct?
Nope. No debt
Okay.
taken on for it. It's all internal funds that we already have or will have. It's just all based on that estimate right now. There's no
And
loan.
then perfect. And then there was a few questions just based on the maintenance of the pool with the switch in how we would be working with the city on it and that they would be renting it.
Mhm.
And that there were some conversations that it could cost the district millions of dollars on a yearly basis newly to maintain the pool. Can you
Right.
just speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's definitely not millions. We're talking hundreds of thousands that we're already cost sharing with the city of Laguna Beach. Now, even though they've pulled out of a joint use agreement, when they rent the pool from us, that rental fee includes the assumed maintenance and even construction cost of the pool. So their hourly rate to rent the pool isn't just based on the operating of the pool at that time. It includes the assumption of how much did that pool cost, depreciate that over 20 or 30 years, and then how much does it cost to operate the pool with including all the utilities and maintenance. So there's still going to be a cost sharing, and so the budget impact, though it will be an increase, it should be fairly significant, especially because the current pool goes as deep as 12 feet and the proposed pool is 7 feet. So the volume of water that the equipment is maintaining is actually not that much more. But again, we'll see all this when it comes out and when we bid it. But as far as the operation of the pool, that shouldn't be significant.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So budget development, I can go pretty fast through these because this is pretty straightforward, right? It's collaboration. We need to collaborate with all of our school sites and our departments to make sure we're developing a budget that meets the needs of whatever support services or students that they're focused on. So we begin each year when we talk about budget development with our staff. I'll just right out front say when I go meet with a school site or department, I'm not talking to them about budgeting for staffing. That's done through human resources. I'm focusing on all their non-staffing related expenditures. The budget changes, whether increase or decrease, is based on what we're seeing as far as cost increases for products or services. It's not based on a per student level. So for example, school sites next year, based on what we've seen, they are planning on a 5% increase on their non-staffing related items. And as I mentioned, departments don't necessarily get a percentage increase or decrease. And a good example of that is information technology. So our IT department, they maintain a very comprehensive refresh schedule. That has to do with all Chromebooks for every single student, all of our servers, even our access points throughout the district. So you don't need to replace those every single year, but every 3 to 5 years, you go through a big replacement cycle. So you could have one year where the IT budget actually declines several $100,000, only to see it go up another 3, 5 years from now, several $100,000. So it's really
Because
based.
it's so cyclical, right?
Yep. And so that's important to maintain because it's not budgeting based on the revenue, just the revenue we receive. We're actually being thoughtful and thinking out 3 to 5 years on what this cycle is going to look like. And that's another reason why that conservative budgeting approach and having that fund balance available is really essential. So it doesn't provide any disruption in service. I apologize, this is blurry. However, the numbers are not as important as the process here. So this is an example from El Moro. This is the exact budget planning sheet we share with them. We sit down with the principal and our admin assistant and we say, okay, here's your past 7 years of budget information, your actual spent over 6 years, and it's by major object code. And then we want you to help us fill out that 25, 26 preliminary budget amount based on that. And we talk through what they're seeing as far as anticipating maybe major purchases. You usually see that in the capital outlay at the bottom. But like I said, because this is not staffing related, you can look at their 2024-25 budget at El Moro, and their non-staffing, their discretionary budget, if you will, was $124,000 out of $85 million budget. So it's not as significant as one might want to make it be, but it's significant for them because that's still a lot of money to spend on non-staffing for a school site. And I think we do this, we meet with our school sites and our departments, we share a very similar sheet with them. And we started last month and we'll finalize by the end of this month with them, where they send it to us and we ask questions and we'll get it complete. So in terms of monitoring our budget health as a community, that's really important. And I think our board's done a really good job over the years of giving business an opportunity and even a requirement to provide more than required financial information. A good example of that is our monthly financial report. And in this presentation, which can be shared after, I linked to the last one. We do this every month. We either have a monthly financial report, an interim report, a budget adoption report. So there's always going to be every month some report on our district's budget. Every single board meeting in the agenda, we have what's called a warrant list. And in the warrant list, it's in consent. You see every single expenditure our school district has made from a previous month. So there's nothing that can be hidden. It's all in that warrant list. With that joint fiscal management committee, I have spent time trying to teach them how to read the account code. So each expenditure, you can actually tell a story by that. We'll have a whole separate meeting on that. That's probably more of a 2 hour meeting because it is very complicated. But it
I
is
feel like
important.
probably most of us just want to trust you on that and not,
On our business
sorry, I don't know
website,
why it keeps doing that. We're just going to ignore it and act like it's not happening.
that's fine. But on our business website, we have all the other reports. So if you want to look at old audits, if you want to look at reports related to our community facilities district, our budgets, everything's there. Um, and so when we talk financing, we talked about general obligation bonds. Back in 2001, the district passed a bond. It gave us what it is, it's called an ad valorem tax. And all it does is add to your property tax bill a certain assessment based on the value of your home. In our case here in Laguna Beach, it's about $10 per $100,000 of assessed value. And if you look at your property tax bill, you'll actually see that for the general obligation bond, how much you're being assessed and paying that off. So the voters, the homeowners, are paying off the loan for the GO bond that supported the facility improvements.
And this is based on assessed value. So it's not necessarily like because so many people obviously have lived in the community so long that their assessed value could be four or $500,000, right? Which would be $50 on a yearly basis versus, new family necessarily that came in and spent $4 million a home and is spending $400 on a yearly basis.
Correct. Yep. It's 100% right. And based on the assessed value back in the day in 2001, that $10 per 100,000 assessed gave the district access to $39 million for facilities improvements. It's set to be paid off by the property owners in 2028. So there's been discussion about extending this GO bond and what it could mean. But that would require formal board action and direction from them. And what it means is that it would go back out to vote. You don't, as a board, you can't, or as a district, you can't just decide to extend a bond. So it's a voter required initiative. It requires more than 55% of the votes to do it. If the bond were to be extended, it would give the district access to about $80 million of facility upgrade money.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to say that the current board has not authorized any bond outreach, and we really haven't reviewed or discussed this concept in any way.
Right.
Yeah, so the board has not taken any action on this at all and has not brought it forward as something that you're
No,
entertaining yet,
no,
right?
it
But
hasn't been authorized, and it would be through a whole public board process.
yeah, of
Yeah.
course. But from a just understanding the mechanics of this, essentially, we would have, if we did do this and extended the bond that we currently have, it would cost taxpayers in the community no change to their property tax bill because we're already paying for it. And it would unlock $80 million for the district, correct?
Yeah, so that's one of the selling points of the extension. That's we've talked about that in the past with the previous board, but that's also why I say on this slide it is a lengthy process. There's a when you campaign for a bond or even an extension, it takes quite a bit, and it usually begins with getting a surveying consultant so that you know what is the likelihood that doing something like this is even worth the effort and an intensive amount of time that it would take. And so the board would have to, one, hire that survey consultant or consultants. There are campaign consultants that usually can get brought on as well. And then the board would have to do a resolution, and the minimum is 88 days prior to the election. That's cutting it pretty tight. I do know some districts that have done it in that 90-day range prior to the election, but usually they do it before then because they want to give themselves a longer runway.
And
And
this has to be in a general election, right? So it can only happen every 2 years. Is that right?
Yep.
And another
And there was oh, sorry, go ahead, Dee.
another consideration is it is not a good idea to do it in the same year that the city is doing a bond. And the city is looking to do a bond coming up to pay for fire mitigation, undergrounding, other things the city needs. And it doesn't go well if a school district and a city go for a bond at the same time. So
Right,
that's
but if ours expires, so we have to do this in the 2026 year because if we wait until 2028, it would have expired by then, correct, Jeff?
Yeah.
and the
So
city's
if we
going to do
don't,
one in
right,
2026.
right, but if we don't renew our bond in 2026, then it would actually have to start over entirely. There would be no renewal. It would be a new bond, right? Which could be harder for taxpayers to understand
Well,
versus
it's
a,
a
hey,
bigger
there's going to be no
percentage that you
change.
need to pass it too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So you're both correct. Um, it would have to be a new bond, but to Dee's point, usually you don't want to have competing bonds. So when the
Right,
city's going for a bond, they usually don't want the district going for the bond and vice versa.
right.
Um, there's been times where it has occurred, but it's not usually worked out well for one of the parties.
Right. And which this was totally news to me because I, again, knew nothing about bonds and district finances, but we are one of the most under leveraged school districts.
Thanks, guys.
Of course. Okay, moving on from the bond.
Okay, so you have a general obligation bond, which is voter approved and paid for by property owners, versus a certificate of participation. And there's a lot of information on what a COP is, how it works, and even all the documents required to support it. But what I want to do is just simplify it for our folks right now and say it's essentially a loan that the general fund pays back. So think of it as any other a car loan, a home loan. It's a loan to support facilities improvements. It can only be used on capital improvements. If you want more information, I would encourage you to go back to the February 13th board agenda that shows how it could be structured. One thing to note in that, however, is that everything we present financially is intended to be conservative. So when you look at the estimates for the COP, or even when you talk about a bond, we're never assuming the highest best rating financially for our school district, which is AAA strong financial. Um, when you look at the board documents, everything's looked at as AA. And that is because we would prefer to under promise, over deliver, especially when it comes to funding. Um, and the same is true in that document. You'll notice that it's a AA rated estimate. That doesn't mean our district's AA, and I want to make sure I clarify that. We recently refinanced our bonds back in 2021, our CFD, or yeah, our general obligation bonds, and we were reaffirmed with S&P as AAA, and we moved from good financial management to strong financial management. So we're now at the highest level we can be for a rating agency. But again, everything is always, I like to assume everything worst case scenario. So you'll note that everything with the COP assume like a $25 million loan. It's really only would be a $20 million loan, but you just don't know with the markets. So always build a cushion in there, and then it assumed AA rating rather than AAA. But
And
we're
how do we pay for this? Like, how does the COP get paid back?
Yeah, this would be paid for out of it's guaranteed and secured with the general fund. So everything that we've been transferring for facilities would be either lowered to pay this loan, and then the rest goes back into the facilities program, or it could be a separate, depending on what the board wants to do. But it would fit within our annual facilities. It fit well within that, and what we're doing is we're waiting for a new superintendent to come on board because we do have time before our carbon neutrality goal of 2030 for the solar, which was what was and mechanical and energy improvements for the COP use, and that's referenced in the February 13th meeting item. But we want to get our new permanent superintendent on board so that they know, hey, here's some really exciting things that are happening. And by the way, we've been recognized as a very high achieving sustainable district. So what are your thoughts on this before we start bringing things back to the board for approval?
And this is is this a normal tool for other districts? I know that we don't have any current COPs, like we don't have any debt in this capacity, but is this something like readily used by other school districts?
Yes. Yeah, COP is not uncommon. It's like a loan for a home improvement. Districts use it for all kinds of facility upgrades.
Great. Okay, so we are 4 minutes over, which I feel okay about since we started 5 minutes late, so we still technically kept it to an hour. Um, Emily, are there any other questions that came through or anything that we need to address?
I do not see any more questions at the moment. I don't know if we want to give people a 2-minute chance to get in there, but we're trying to stay on topic and be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no, I would say no. If nobody's asked them, then let's just wrap it up. Jeff, thank you so much for putting this presentation together and walking us through it. I know since the community obviously has so many questions around facilities and how we would pay for the pool and all of that, we would love to do another one down the road when you guys have more information and when the board has kind of taken the next steps to move forward with you guys. To certainly address that as well. Dee, thank you so much for your time as well tonight. We really appreciate you participating.
My pleasure, and thank you all. And Jeff, you did a fabulous job. Get to making your dinner.
Thank you, Dee.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye.